Hi, I'm Chris Long at B&W Trailer Hitches, and today we're going to be installing the GNRK 1309 Turnoverball gooseneck hitch in this 2016 Ram 1500. Now the 1309 will work on all models of the Ram half-tons from 2009 to current year models at the time of this filming. However, there are a lot of different configurations of this truck, and you'll want to familiarize yourself with the front page of the installation instructions, which will draw your attention to some of the challenges that you may face with this particular installation. So let's get started by dropping the spare wheel and tire. Unlike our other models of Turnoverball, this particular hitch will require us to drill 2 holes in the truck bed. The reason for this is that the release handle is not in the driver's side fender well, it's in the truck bed itself. So we'll drill a 4-inch hole for the center section and gooseneck ball and a smaller 3/4-inch hole for the latch pin release. Now let's measure, mark, and drill the holes in the bed. Be sure to follow the measurements that are outlined in the installation instructions. Because there are different lengths of beds in these half-tons, you'll want to make sure that you're following the correct measurement for the specific truck that you're working on. You can find the locations of these holes by hooking a measuring tape to the back edge of the truck bed and measuring forward to the measurements given in the instructions for both the 4-inch and the 3/4-inch hole locations. Once you have those forward and aft marks located in the bed, then you'll want to center those up left and right between the fender wells, or in this case, the walls of the Ram box truck bed. Once you have those marked, center punch and drill a very small pilot hole. You can see that I've already done that here for the 4-inch location, and then you'll do that again for the 3/4-inch hole location. Once you have these 2 small pilot holes in place, double check that they are within the specifications of the installation instructions measurements. As long as they are, then you can enlarge those holes up to 1/4 inch. Don't go any larger than 1/4 or your hole saw will not work correctly. Then double check the measurements once again, and then you can cut your 4-inch hole and your 3/4-inch hole. All right, I'm going to cut the 4-inch hole in the bed first. I'm going to run the saw backwards just a little bit to establish a cutting groove. Then we'll run the saw forward to complete the cut. After you've drilled the holes in the bed, you can move to the underside of the truck. Now, as you can tell, there are a lot of components under here that might make the installation a little bit of a challenge. There are a few things that you can do to make this part of the installation easier. What we've done on this model of truck is we've removed the fender well liners from both sides of the truck. We've also removed the spare wheel and tire heat shield. And on this dual exhaust model, we've removed the 5 rearmost rubber hangers to allow the exhaust to sag a little. This will help us get the center section into place a lot easier later in the installation. Now, regardless of what model of truck you've got, you're going to need to remove the wiring harness from the driver's side frame rail and from the top of this cross member. I've already taken the clips loose. As you can see here on this secondary harness, I've got about 4 or 5 clips loose all the way across that cross member. And then the driver's side frame has the main harness, which you can't see off camera here. It's got about 3 or 4 clips that you'll need to unplug from the frame. This will allow us to move the wiring harness around freely so that it doesn't get pinched between the cross members of the hitch and the frame of the truck. So be sure to get those undone. Then this vent tube, you simply undo the clips by pushing rearward, and then take the one on the end of the vent hose free. There we go. And just let this vent tube hang freely. We can reinstall it at the end of the installation. If you've got a truck that has air suspension, you'll need to be aware of the air lines under here as well. Now we can put our cross members into position. We're going to install the rear cross member first. The rear cross member is the 1-inch by 2-inch solid steel bar with the notch that's machined on one end of it. We want to make sure that this notch is the leading end that we insert into the truck, and we want that notch to face rearward. Here we are in the passenger side fender well, and we're going to insert this bar in this triangular framed opening right here on the underside of the frame, forward of the shock, and above the suspension arm. Just feed the bar flat up over that suspension bar, over the exhaust pipe, and feed it through to the top of the driver's side frame. Be sure that you're not pinching the wiring harness or the brake lines over there. And now we can finish placing it from underneath. Under the truck, continue with the rear cross member installation by feeding the leading end of the bar up over the driver's side frame rail. Be sure that the main wiring harness on the driver's side frame is towards the inside of the frame, and then continue to feed it up and back until the trailing end of the bar can be placed on top of the passenger side frame right here behind that bed cross member. Once it's up on top of the passenger side of the frame, you can then straighten the bar up, slide it to the back, and then rotate it into position. Before moving on with the positioning of the center section, we need to make sure that the electrical harnesses are not being pinched or smashed by the cross member that we just installed. As you can see here along this stretch of harness, it's been completely moved rearward so that it's not between the cross member of the hitch and the top of the cross member of the truck. And then here, where it passes over the frame cross member of the truck and under the provided notch in the cross member of the hitch, we need to make sure that that harness moves freely. That tells us that it's fully in the notch and it's not being smashed. On top of the driver's side frame rail, we want to make sure that the main wiring harness is also free of the end of the cross member and that it's tucked to the inside of the frame rail. Now we're going to install the center section. It's important to have this properly positioned so that it will go in correctly. This is the top of the center section and the bottom. You want the bottom side of the center section to face the passenger side of the truck as you insert it. Also, you'll notice that the spring side, the spring mechanism of the center section is facing down and rearward as we go into the truck. So we're going to lift this up, bottom side towards the passenger side of the truck, with the non-spring side of the center section going in first, up over the exhaust. And as you curve it around the exhaust and clear, in this case, the dual exhaust, come up over the pipe, clearing the fuel tank, and then position the center section under your 4-inch hole in the bed. Now we can use our overhead lifting device to draw it up tight to the underside of the bed. With the center section held firmly to the underside of the bed, we can now push that rear cross member forward up against it. Now you'll want to double check to make sure that wiring harness is still free inside that notch. Once we have that up against the center section, you'll notice that there are 5 slots in the rear part of the center section. You've got one here, here, one in the middle, here, and then one over here on the far driver's side edge. For right now, we're only going to hand start the outside 2, so the one in the far passenger side corner, and the one in the far driver's side corner, and then the one here in the middle. Get those started and then just snug those down firmly by hand. We're going to leave these 2 here free for a bracket later on in the installation. Now we're going to install the front angle cross member. Now you want to insert this in the truck the same way we did the rear cross member, through that section there between the frame, shock, and that suspension arm. We want to insert this where the holes in the angle are facing the rear of the truck with the ridge of that angle facing upward. So we're going to place that right inside that opening, slide it right up over the exhaust, and up on top of the driver's side frame rail. And then we'll finish the placement under the truck. Back under the truck, we're going to continue positioning the front cross member. We're going to do this just like we did the rear cross member. Continue to feed it up over the top of the driver's side frame rail. Be sure you're not pinching or dragging that wiring harness. And keep feeding it over until the tail end of the cross member clears the passenger side frame. Then feed it back up over the top to where it's spanning both sides. Now pull the cross member rearward until it's up against the center section. Make sure we're not pinching that wiring harness. You can lay it down right next to those brake lines and then roll it into position, and we can insert our hardware. Now we're going to attach the front cross member to the center section. And we're only going to attach it with 2 of the 4 locations right now, the 2 center ones. We're going to leave the outside 2 open for now. Those will come into play when we do the side plates. These are the longer 2 1/4 inch bolts that you'll use for these 2 points. I've already got this one in. The heads of the bolts face the rear of the truck and the threads face the front. So put that through with your bolt and your flat washer, and then secure it on the other side with a lock washer and nut. just thread these down by hand for now. And then we can move on to side plate installation. Now we're going to install our U-bolts. We're inside the passenger side fender well, and you'll install these U-bolts by placing it in front of the suspension coil, but behind the coil tower bracket, just like so. Now, we only want to come in to where the ends of the U-bolt are flush with the inside edge of the passenger side frame rail. That's about as far as you want to go in for now. Once you've got the U-bolt placed where you want it, just let it hang, and now we're going to repeat that process on the driver's side. Now we're going to install the passenger side plate. This is the only one in the kit that doesn't have the cutouts and the slots for the brake lines and the wiring harnesses. Now, if you're dealing with a truck that has air suspension, be sure to follow the instructions that deal with the air lines. Now, what we're going to do is feed this up into position and get our U-bolt situated where we can feed the U-bolt through the two holes on that side of the plate. Once we have that secure, we'll fasten that with lock washers and nuts on both the bottom and the top. You just get these started enough that you don't have to worry about it coming loose. To wiggle that through a little bit. There we go. Now with that held into place for you, you can take the long 2 1/4 inch bolt with a flat washer under the head and feed it through the center section, cross member, and side plate. Just like so. Then we're going to take the standard 1/2 inch bolt with no washer under the head and slide it through the cross member in the plate. And then we'll secure these 2 bolts with flat washers, lock washers, and nuts on the back side. No need to tighten these down just yet. Let's just get them tightened by hand, and then we can move over to the driver's side. When installing the driver's side plates, you'll notice that there are 2 of these. The first one that goes on will have this slot that's cut in the bracket. This is what's designed to go around the brake lines and the electrical harness here on the driver's side frame. The second one looks very similar, but instead of that narrow slot, it has a larger cutout opening. This one will actually stack on top of the first bracket, and it'll install second. So let's go ahead and get the first one on. You'll notice that I turn it with the slot in that bracket facing the front of the truck. Raise it right up over the brake lines and the electrical harness, up against the side of the frame of the truck, and then position your U-bolts in the holes. Now you only need about 1/4 inch of thread of that U-bolt sticking through on both the top and the bottom, because the next bracket's going to slide up into position and then the U-bolt will continue through. So let's go ahead and get the second bracket into position. When you install the second driver's side plate, it's easiest to come up from the bottom. So slide this up along the surface of the first bracket that you installed. Be sure that the plate slides up behind the electrical harness. And once the holes line up in the 2 brackets, push your U-bolt through both plates. And now we'll secure your U-bolts with lock washers and nuts. And these, again, don't have to be tightened down. Just get them snug by hand. And once we get these into position, then we can put the rest of our hardware in. Before we install the rear brace, we need to get these strap bolts into position. These are the short 5/8 bolts that have the straps welded right to the heads. These are going to install into these locations here and here. Now, to get these into the proper place, you can come in from the side and roll them up into the hole, but I have found that coming up through the slot in the bottom of this brace is a little easier by going straight up and then into the slot of the cross member, and then just roll the bolt into place where it drops into that hole. Repeat the same thing on the driver's side. All right, now we can go up with our rear brace. Position the rear brace with the flanges that have these 2 vertical slotted holes upward, and these 3 tabs, the 2 outside ones that have the slotted holes facing the rear of the truck. Just slide this up over the exhaust and come in from the front side of this cross member with that center tab here in this area. Line those slotted holes up with the strap bolts that we put in earlier. Be sure not to knock them back up in the frame. And then use the 5/8 flange nuts to secure those into position. You can leave them a little loose now, just to hold it into place. Okay, and now we're going to install the last two bolts, which are the 1.5 inch grade 8 bolts with the flat washer and lock washer underneath the head. And these are the ones that are going to attach the rear brace, the center section, and the cross member together. Just thread those in by hand till they're snug. There we go. There we go. And just finish snugging these up by hand. Okay. Now, with all of our hardware in and positioned, double check that you're clearing your brake lines and that your electric harness is still free. And now it's time to tighten. Be sure to follow the tightening sequence that's outlined in the installation instructions. It's very important to follow that. Once you've got everything tight, then be sure to use a torque wrench and torque all of your fasteners to the proper specs. Now that I've tightened and torqued all of the fasteners, it's time to drill the holes for the safety chain loops. Now you're going to take a 1/2 inch drill bit and line that drill bit up with the holes that are provided in the center section on both the driver and passenger side, and drill your 1/2 inch holes up through the bed. Now you can drill all the way through if you'd like, but that's usually going to leave kind of a curled edge in the top of the bed. If you want a cleaner looking hole, you can use the 1/2 inch drill to make like a divot mark for a little bit. Don't drill all the way through, and then change out to a pilot bit and drill the pilot holes from underneath, and then you can drill the 1/2 inch holes from the top side of the bed down. That'll give you a little bit cleaner appearance in the bed. That's what we're going to do today. So watch how we do this. There we go, just enough to make a divot in the metal. Change my bit out. I'm dropping all the way down to an 1/8 inch. Line that up with the center of that divot that your 1/2 inch bit made. Okay, now with that nice pilot hole in there, we'll repeat that process for the other 3 locations, and then we can drill our 1/2 inch holes from the top side down. With the safety chain U-bolts dropped in from the top side of the bed, now you can install the springs. The springs are tapered. You have a wide end and a narrow end. Be sure the wide end is up. Place that right over the U-bolt. Take your lock nut and thread that on. Now you'll have to use a tool to run that up the rest of the way. Only go until the U-bolt is flush with the end of the nut, just like the one you see I've already done right here. Do that at all 4 points on the safety chain U-bolts, and that portion will be complete. This is a great time under here to go ahead and finish everything else up. If you took the exhaust down, took out the spare tire heat shield, relocated any of these lines, harnesses, or hoses, tie all that up, rehang the exhaust, put everything back in its location. The vent hose that we took down earlier, you'll notice that it has a clip here on the end. Take that clip off and then reposition this hose to where you have about that much slack on your vent hose, and then place the clip back on the hose in this location and clip it to the frame right here. The only thing you want to make sure is that the slack of this hose is not any further down than the lower edge of the axle of the differential. As long as it's not hanging down below that, you're good. And then you can place a zip tie if you want around this area. Tie that back up that way, and that should wrap us up underneath the truck. Now that our hitch is installed, it's time to put it to use. Simply insert your ball into the receiver socket, take your latch handle, and engage the latch mechanism, and you're ready to tow a trailer. When you're done towing, use that same handle to disengage the mechanism, remove your ball, turn it over back into the receiver socket, re-engage the latch, and in true B&W fashion, a hitch when you need it, a level bed when you don't.